Good morning, or very early afternoon. I hope you're all doing very well on patch day. Hey Kitsuneko, hey Yizu, hey Varek, hey Uru, and hey Gazel. I hope you're doing very well. I hope your the weird launcher problems you mentioned this morning resolve soon, Gazel. And hey Aridel, hope you're doing well as well. So the way that this stream is going to work is I'm going to be avoiding spoilers as much as possible, which means, for example, that I will say that, well, obviously there's a new MSQ, but I will not say where we're going, because that alone can be considered a spoiler. I will say there's a new dungeon and a new trial, but saying what they are would be considered a spoiler. So for the most part, the people that know what we're doing, like the people that wouldn't consider it a spoiler, will probably go, ah, right, the trial, yes, and just go and do it. Whereas the people that don't know or aren't, like, caught up yet might appreciate that I'm not, like, just name-dropping where or what it is. Which of course will affect some other things throughout this stream where I'm like, oh, there's this thing, but I'm not going to tell you where it is. Because if I do, that is technically a spoiler. So you might have to like fill in some blanks yourself. However, if you reach a point where you're like, I actually have no idea what he's talking about and I really, really need him to explain it, after this stream, there's going to be a little break, and then I will start a spoiler stream where I will be doing the new MSQ. You can just ask me there, and I'll just tell you, because then I'm assuming that you don't mind. So I'm trying to be nice for the people that want to hear some patch notes, but don't want to risk getting spoiled. That is generally the idea in this stream. So, there's a few subjects to go over here. The first one to start with is, as Varek pointed out, there are some buffs to some jobs. I estimated somewhat quickly some percentages. So, to be completely clear with my calculation, which I see isn't too far from someone else's calculation that I saw this morning, I basically took a savage boss fight, took a random high performing player off the job and checked the percentage of the damage they do spread across the actions. This means, for example, that the Circle of Scorn buff, which was, let's see, 16.67 or 16.66666, repeating of course, percent increase to the upfront damage of Circle of Scorn. Which is not a lot, but it's 20 potency, which you get twice per minute is, you know, it's okay. The complicated part is that how often does Circle of Scorn land during buffs? And that's why we take a random, like, actual performance and see, well, how much percent of your total damage is this upfront damage normally? And the calculation or the estimate that I found was that Circle of Scorn's upfront damage is worth around 1.77% of your total damage. So 1.77%, which means that this increase in potency to Circle of Scorn is actually around a 0.3% total damage boost to Paladin. 0.3%. But, no wait, that is wrong. Let me see here. No, that is correct. It just sounds weirdly abnormal because all of the other buffs are once per minute. So I did this for all of the potency gains. I checked a high passing log so that we can assume that the person playing is playing, you know, close to perfectly. So we can assume that it's like an upper bound. It might be a lower bound. It might be that in reality it's closer to a little less. It could be a little more. Maybe the person was really unlucky and didn't get any crits with the particular action in that particular log that I checked. So there is just keep in mind there is some margin of error, and I'll admit that up front. But my estimates is that Paladin got around 1.22% more DPS, give or take. So about slightly more than 1% DPS gain, which is pretty reasonable based on log data. I believe Paladin was slightly more than 1% DPS behind the third place tank. So that means that there's a pretty good chance that Paladin Ether will be equal to the other, like the second to last place, or will beat it by like very slight amount, or might just be stay at the bottom. Thing is, tanks are in a really good spot right now, in my opinion. So that's, I think it's a good buff. It's weird to see you just get like 20 potency on a bunch of things. I also thought that it was very strange that they added specifically 20 to like each step in this 4-step combo, like, and technically 5-step combo, you could almost say. The only time where it matters that Requiescent and Confiteor got a buff, as opposed to the Blades combo getting a buff. Like, the thing is, they could have given, like, you would have gotten the exact same value on a single target if they had just taken all 5 of these 20 potency buffs and put it on Requiescent. On AoE, it would have been mostly the same if they just had given all of the 20 buffs to Confiteor, because they're all in the same combo. The only time where this matters is if you want to be able to like part out the damage on different targets, or if you're not level 90 yet. Like, that is ultimately where there's a big difference. There's also, of course, the part that having the damage spread out a bit means that there's a less of a swing depending on your crit luck. Like, if all the 100 extra potency was just planted on Confiteor, that would, of course, mean that Paladin would be even more dependent on praying and hoping that Confiteor was the one that got a critical direct hit and not fast played. But yeah, that is true, Varric. Generally, at the end of an expansion, the jobs tend to like fluctuate into a pretty good balance. I think part of the reason for this is, of course, that the development team starts to focus on making the jobs like just preserving them for the rest of the expansion, especially because the rest of the expansion in this particular case means until next summer. There are a few more additions left before the next expansion, but ultimately they just said we're making no more massive like job changes for the remainder of this expansion. So that gives them the free space to just go, okay, how can we make them all fine? And because there's not really any more gear that will like switch up the balance and mess things up, there's very little that'll change. They can adjust the jobs to all be in a good range. But as I said, this is how the jobs are going to be playing until next summer, pretty much. And that means that, remember, summer, we kinda recently left summer, so that does mean that we might, in the worst case, be looking down like 8 to 10 months of however the jobs are playing now. So hopefully people are happy with how their mains play, because they're not going to change them much. But that, of course, means that the balance is going to be really good. But that is also very true, Varric. The reason why I say that it doesn't really matter that much with this combo, it matters a lot if Requiescent had gotten all of the damage, because Requiescent typically lands like right before raid buffs or right as they come out. So there's a much bigger chance that Requiescent misses the buffs. But in a coordinated team, these 4 steps and Goring Blade are pretty much guaranteed to land in raid buffs, so that them being spread out or not assuming the group is coordinated, it doesn't make a difference. If the group isn't coordinated and the buffs come out a little willy-nilly, then them being spread out a bit means that, of course, you're less hurt by 1 or 2 of your steps missing the buffs. But yeah, it was just more to say that I thought it was very interesting that they did it like this, because, I mean, I would have liked it to be 300, 1000, 7, 8, 9. Think that would be a nicer way to see it, but I get it. Like, I mean, it hasn't been the first time where we lost some sort of nice looking number for the sake of balance. Remember, in Enhanced Enochian 3 was 20% at the start of Endwalker. Also, I think I missed saying hi to Imia when they arrived, so I hope you're doing well as well. And Kaisha, and Tracy, and Cortez. Hope you're all doing very well on patch day morning. Right, so overall, Paladin a little bit more than 1% damage gain-ish. Next one. Red Mage. That is actually the weird one, or the most difficult to quantify, if we were to like sit down and just count the numbers of potencies and stuff. Because Red Mage got buffs to filler combo. So just to go over it before I leave it, Paladin got a 20 potency buff to Circle of Scorn, which is a 30-second cooldown. Confiteor, Faith, Truth, and Valor Blades, and Requiesced. So basically their magic burst got like approximately a 100 potency combo, and one of their OGCTs. Red Mage got a tiny buff, I believe. Yep, 10 to the Fire and the Stone, and 10 to Jolt. So basically the fast spells got a 10 potency buff. Contrasixt got a 20 potency buff. That's like you were already using that on cooldown, but exactly how often that lands in raid buffs is also complicated, because you're using it on cooldown. And sometimes it aligns and sometimes it doesn't really. And then the Flare and the Holy also got a 20 potency buff. Naturally, Enchanted Repr also got a 10 potency buff. However, unless you're making some sort of mistake and misjudging how much movement you have to work with at a specific point when practicing a boss fight, for example. Optimally, Enchanted Repr has a 0% use rate when playing optimally. So the Enchanted Repr is mostly because I'm guessing they want it to be balanced such that Enchanted Repr is as good as the Stone or the Fire. The problem with Enchanted Repr is not its potency, the problem is that it costs 10 mana to use. And it's a little difficult to like put exactly into words how much 5 or 10 mana is worth. But if we sat down and calculated the full melee combo takes around 5 GCDs worth of time to perform. So the question would be, what would the average filler potency of 5 GCDs be? And then how much potency is a melee combo? The full thing, also including resolution. And then you want to take the difference, and then from there we would be able to calculate, well then how much is 10 mana worth, because that's a 10th of a melee combo. And let's just say that Enchanted Repr does not, in most situations, it does not give enough value. Castle says, if you aren't supposed to use it, would it be better to simply not include it in the calculation? It is automatically not included in my calculation because the log that I found was of course a red mage performing extremely well, which means they didn't use Enchanted Repr, which means that the potency gain to Enchanted Repr adds up to 0 DPS gain. Warwick says, from the outside looking in, could be a way to shed excess mana to not overcap during manification. You could do that, but generally, I think people would simply just say that usually you don't cap both manas during manification. And if you do, there's a completely different reason for that. So, if you're overcapping your mana when you use manification, it is almost guaranteed that it is because you're trying to perform 2 melee combos back to back or even 3 melee combos back to back. And if you are doing that, you're doing that for a reason, and that reason means that Enchanted Repr does not have a GCD free to be used in, because you're using those 3 melee combos in quick succession, for example, to fit them in raid buffs. So the thing is, what Enchanted Repr serves as a purpose, like what Enchanted Repr is used for, is not to vent extra mana, because generally speaking, Red Mage does not have extra mana. You either use your mana or you don't, and you should be using it. You should not be overcapping if you're playing well. It should generally not happen, and if it happens, there's a good reason for it. You're planning around something. And that means that Enchanted Repr's main purpose is that you can spend 10 mana to essentially get to swift cast of a fire or of a stone, figuratively speaking, because obviously you're losing 10 mana rather than gaining 5. But that is the purpose. It is specifically when there is movement you didn't calculate for, like when something sneaks up on you. But overall, all of these potency gains, which of course includes no gain from Enchanted Repr, because optimally you're not using it, adds up to about 1.04% gain for Red Mage, based on this same calculation method that I mentioned before. So, about 1%, which is pretty fine. I believe Red Mage was slightly behind Summoner. But the reason why Red Mage is behind Summoner on average is because of the expanded utility of the Red Mage toolkit. Summoner doesn't really like it. Summoner offers a bit of like passive healing as part of its rotation whenever it casts Phoenix. Red Mage can cast the Cure whenever you need it, or the Raise whenever you need it. The thing is that it's not a huge difference. Like, I don't remember exactly. I don't know if the logs still will show me. But yeah, the power difference between Red Mage and Summoner is like 1.5%. So with this 1% buff, it's going to be, you know, maybe 0.5% of difference, because Summoner didn't get buffs. So it might not be so bad. It's a good buff, especially because filler is a lot easier to make good, right? It's like when you buff the burst, then it means that to make the most of the buff you got from the patch, you actually have to like land it in the raid buffs. If it's filler that is being buffed primarily, then it's just play the game and you'll do more damage. That of course also means that if the amount of damage you do with your filler is surprisingly low, then it becomes less impactful. But let's just say that the fire and the stone add up to around 12 to 13% of all of the damage a Red Mage does in a fight. Something like that. Maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. Also, hey Sharo, hope you're doing well. Yeah, it's a really good buff because it means that you're getting more damage for just playing the game. Yeah. And hey, Angel, hope you're doing well. Right. So next we have Reaper, which also has a slightly complicated thing to calculate, but it's not so bad. The two things that got buffed is a Gluttony got a 20 potency buff, and Lemure Slice got a 20 potency buff. So the Gluttony buff pretty much, of course, just means that you're getting 20 extra potency every minute. The reason why it's a little hard to calculate with is because all we know with Lemure Slice is that you're getting 2 of them per Enshroud, and on average, a Reaper gets 3 Enshrouds per 2 minutes. But 2 of those Enshrouds typically land in raid buffs. So that does mean that you're getting around 100 potency potentially within raid buffs. The reason why I'm saying potentially is because when you're doing your double Enshroud as a Reaper, the primary focus is to make sure both of your Communio casts land in raid buffs. You don't actually care that much that Lemure Slice lands in it or not. Like, sure, if it does, excellent. But the main meat is that you want to make sure that both of your 2 Communios land in raid buffs. Like, that's the big selling point. So it's very, very possible that Lemure Slice does not land in raid buffs. However, what this does mean is still that the Lemure Slice buff, based on the same type of estimate that I had before, adds up to nearly 0.5% of damage gain, just the Lemure Slice buff. The Gluttony buff is closer to 0.1%. So combining those, Reaper will be doing around 0.57% more damage based on my estimate, which is fine. Reaper was, I believe, based on our DPS, which is, you know, the amount, you could say the amount of DPS a job contributes to a raid. Reaper was at the bottom of the melee DPS with like a significant dip, like after the job be above it. So like, similar to Paladin, where it's like, it could use a little buff. Like, personally, I would say Reaper could probably have used a full 1% as well. But if you give it too much, then it might swing really hard and then just go to the top. And maybe that's not what they want. Remember, if you compare the different melee DPS, you have Reaper, which has a raid buff, and a defensive cooldown, which heals the raid. Compare that to, I don't know, Dragoon, which has a raid buff, a buff shared with one person, and I seem to observe a severe lack of defensive cooldowns here. So, by that logic, it would make sense, as Warwick put it before, utility tax. Reaper has utility which Dragoon does not. Hence, Reaper has to be just a little weaker than Dragoon. It doesn't require much. And like, honestly, this is something that might be pretty funny with utility tax, is that, and I've said this many times before, that when comparing jobs, it's pretty common for the player base. This is getting really weird. Let me see here. It's very common for the player base to not look at this. They don't notice that red mage is here and summoners here. Like, you can see the bar here. It's not a huge difference. And you can see the bar here. It's not a huge difference, but it looks very massive because this bar is weird. Note, this doesn't say 0. That's important. What it is very common for people to see is not all this. It's a lot more common that people just see... Can I? No, I can't. It's very common for them to just see this part where you can see the ranking of the jobs. This score stuff, bah, don't care. Max, who cares? Passes, meh. Just this. Black Mage beats Dragoon. QED, end of story. Which means that Red Mage could be doing 0.1% less DPS than Summoner, and people might still complain that it's because of utility tax. But who knows for certain? What I'm saying is just that if the requirement is that this job has more utility than that job, so this job has to be weaker, then the follow-up question is how much weaker? And the thing is that, as we have seen in many a discussion on utility tax, for example, Red Mage, once your group doesn't wipe anymore, or doesn't die anymore on a boss fight, then people often view Red Mage's utility as, because of course, as we know, Red Mage only has 2 utility buttons. I don't know why you're looking at that. They only have 2 utility buttons, of course. Not 3, just 2. So once people stop dying and stop needing extra heals and stuff, Red Mage's utility is completely useless and they bring nothing to the table at all. Nothing at all. Which means that the way people view it is, if your utility is helpful, then it is okay for you to do less damage. But how much less damage? Because people are willing to bring a Red Mage for the sake of having berets, even if it does a significant amount of less damage than the competitor. So it wouldn't surprise me if the actual utility tax that we're seeing is going to like drop and drop and drop, so like the window between jobs is going to be decided more so by, well, this job actually just has a slight advantage in this rate tier, rather than this job has to do less damage than that job, because utility reasons. Ymir says, did you know that your Stola uses AoE on trash in the new dungeon? No comment. I haven't been there yet. But I wonder, because she's always cast single target versions of AoE named attacks. It's quite funny. Right, so finally, Bard also got some buffs. Very, very specific buffs in that Sidewinder and Imperial Arrow. Can you even see that? Kind of. And Imperial Arrow got, I believe it was 20 potency buffs? It was 10 to Imperial Arrow and 20 to Sidewinder. So, the Sidewinder buff is, you know, a pretty small buff, a very predictable buff. Imperial Arrow is a lot more complicated because you get a lot of casts of them, so sometimes you'll get 2 of them in raid buffs. Sometimes. Overall, my estimate is that that was a 0.49% DPS gain. Not very surprising. The Imperial Arrow was a much bigger difference in the buffs. So, again, as we saw on the Bard on the logs, they could also use a little buff. That was nice. But yeah, not really massive changes. Warwick did mention, I believe, that it's pretty normal for small balance changes at the end of the expansion. Fun fact, I remember very rather late, I believe, or maybe it was like leading up to the 3rd raid tier, I can't remember exactly, in Shadowbringers, where summoners were told, like we were told that summoner, which was like the top dog, like you saw Black Mage on that log, back then, Summoner was not only the top DPS, it had mobility for the majority of its rotation, provided utility in the form of being able to raise people, had a raid buff, did healing with its Phoenix, like it had everything, and was the top DPS. And then we were told, oh, in the next patch, Summoner's getting nerfed. And people were like, the Summoner mains were acting like the sky was falling down. What we actually got was, I believe it was like a 30 potency nerf to Festa, which when you calculated it was exactly, like precisely a nerf to Summoner, which tallied up to precisely the percentage it was doing more damage than second place on the logs. Like, they basically went, you're second place now, like exactly second place. And Summoners were acting like, and remember, I was a Summoner main then, Summoners were acting like now the job is useless because it got nerfed, and then, you know, the more reasonable people came in and was like, relax, it's not that big of a deal, we're still second place or so. But the thing that is interesting with that is that when you buff the jobs that are behind a little bit, then people are generally happy. When you nerf the jobs that are at the top, they're generally not happy. Guy saw the nerf and threw away his book and carbuncle. I actually continued playing Summoner because I saw the nerf and was like, oh, that wasn't that much. Gazel says those people are only interested in the first place. That is actually a good point. It is very reasonable to assume that a lot of players that are playing the top job on the logs are playing it not because they like it, but because it's the best. Which is an excellent way to enjoy your games, to only play the best regardless of enjoyment, right? In a very healthy way to play video games. So of course, when Summoner gets nerfed, the way that these kinds of players would view it is, oh, now I have to switch to a different job, and then I have to gear that instead. Oh. Or maybe they're just concerned that they might have to. I think the saving grace on that was that I believe back then, it's been a long time, but I believe back then Black Mage wasn't close to Summoner, and Red Mage obviously wasn't close to Summoner. So if you were a Mage main, you would still be like, well, the first place Mage is Summoner, so I'm probably going to just stay put. Yeah, exactly, Black Lion. In other games we have the Flavor of the Month class as well, and it's extra funny in games where it is a massive time investment to just level a character. Like in World of Warcraft, oh, now this class is the Flavor of the Month. Oh, now I have to level this. It'll take a week or at least a few days, depending on how much time I have to game every day. I also have to raid on my main while I'm doing this, so I don't lose my raid spot. And then I have to gear this character up. Oh, and you'd have to gear them all from the beginning again, whereas in Final Fantasy XIV, as I said, if you're a Mage main, you can take most of your equipment and just apply to the different Mage. It should also be noted regarding week 1 clear people is that I think it was in the second raid tier, you know, the one where there was a so strict DPS check on P8S that you might not beat it if you were playing the weakest jobs. But I do remember that there were groups that brought, I do believe they said a Black Mage, not necessarily whether because it was good or not, but specifically because that player in their team who was playing the Mage wanted to play Black Mage. And if you can compete and clear week 1 with, I like to play this, then I think we have a good balance in the game. Yeah, Kat says I play Bard mostly because the Moogle bow amuses me. You know, there's Moogle weapons for all of them, so. You have to be a crit DT. Oh, you'd have to be a slow mage to be able to apply the gear directly, yes. That is true. But it was more to put an example that in Shadowbringers, these summoner mains could just go, well, I can use most of my gear and it'll be fine. Right, so a lot of potency talk. So what else is in the patch? So as I said before, there's of course new MSQ, there's a new dungeon and a new trial. What might be helpful for people that like to do hunt trains is that the 2 main zones that this MSQ is going to be happening in will have multiple instances. Usually it's like 2 or 3. Why is this important? It's because hunt targets can spawn in each of the instances separately, which means that you have double or triple the amount of opportunities. 2 instances, Angel says. So if you're in the business of doing hunt trains, then it might be worth looking into which zones these are if you're not sure, because this might still be helpful for you if you haven't caught up on the MSQ. I'm going to refrain from saying which zones they are, because that would be a spoiler. Maybe. And if you don't mind, you can check it. That is my advice. Or you can ask me in the spoiler stream a little later. Speaking of the hunt trains, a reason why you might want to do hunt trains is that, yeah, exactly, redacted and redacted, is because when you do hunts in, Endwalker and Shadowbringer content, you get sacks of nuts. Why are those relevant? That is because the gear you can buy for your weekly tomestones, the elegant tomestones of comedy, like the Credendum Circle of Fending here, you can buy the item which are used to upgrade them to 660, the augmented version, with sacks of nuts. And we did calculate a little bit on this on the Discord servers a while back, but basically if you want to upgrade your tombstone gear, while you can get 1 a week from Alliance raids, I'll get to that, if you really farm hunt trains like a mad person, you can get an absolutely ludicrous amount of sacks of nuts. So you would be able to upgrade, you would eventually reach a point where you run out of tombstone gear to upgrade, despite the massive lead of tombstones you've had to accumulate gear. So if you're interested in that, consider that. And speaking of Alliance raid, there's a new Alliance raid. So the final Alliance raid of this expansion is also releasing today. It of course wraps up on that story, which I'm not getting into. But what is important is that you can buy one of these pieces of items that you can use to upgrade Credendum armor and accessories, not weapons. This also applies for the sacks of nuts. You can only upgrade armor and accessories with the items you can get for the sacks of nuts, not weapons. With 1 coin from each of this expansion's Alliance raids, you need 1 of each. You can buy 1 upgrade item of your choice for armor or accessories. Which means, of course, that it would take you 9 weeks to get all of them. Why this is relevant is that the newest Alliance raid, you get only 1 coin per week for doing it. Like, just beating the final boss, you get a coin. The 2 other, the older Alliance raids, which I'm these 2 coins here, you can spam them to your heart's content as much as you like. But you need 1 coin of each. Warwick says 9 weeks plus minus doing Savage content. Well, here's the thing. If you're doing Savage content, then you don't need these coins. Like, if you're already doing weekly Savage re-clears, you might not need these coins at all. You might not. In fact, you might not care that much about the Credendum gear. Because you have already upgraded it. 3rd job gearing. How about 4th or 5th job gearing? But yeah, the point is, I'm targeting a little bit more in this case, more casual players that don't have access to Savage, because they would be significantly more interested in this stuff. But yeah, I get it, Warwick. 19th job gearing. Yeah, exactly. So, with that in mind, what this means if you're gearing up in Endwalker is in patch 6.5, your path of progression is first, like with a newly leveled job to 90. The first step is to buy a crafted set, which is item level 640. Then you can each week buy maybe one, maybe not one for the more expensive ones. You can buy some credendum gear for 650. But with your causality tomestones, you can buy so-called rain, which you can use to upgrade crafted gear. I haven't done that yet. You can upgrade your crafted gear to 650 for, you know, a stat gain as well. And that means that that would be your first target. Now, you might say, what if I can't afford a crafted set? There are, and I'm just going to go over to the market board to show these items. There are 6 items that you can buy in bulk for these tomestones, which are these 6 items. They're used to make the crafted gear and some other things. The reason why they're irrelevant is because if you have a level 90 job, you can farm these. And if you can farm these, you can buy these to sell on the market to make money. So if you have no idea how to make, like, there's many ways in Final Fantasy XIV to like farm money, but like this is literally just spam expert roulette and then sell your causality tomestones. Like, you can do that as an example. That is an option. There are many ways, better ways of making money, but this is like, it's like a surefire way that anyone with a level 90 job would be able to do. So do this, sell these, buy crafted gear. Once you've done that, you can use the causality tomestones to buy this rain, which you do in Ratatan. And you can then upgrade this crafted gear to 650, and the way you upgrade it is you hand in your 640 piece for a token, or for tokens, and then you can buy the 650 piece for tokens plus rain. It doesn't even have to be the same token. You're getting like generic tokens, which you can use to buy gear. So if you see like that, I don't know, the ninja weapon is really cheap on the market board, you could just buy like 7 of those and give them in for tokens, and then use those tokens to buy upgraded crafted gear. But once you have 650 crafted gear, you can start collecting 650 credendum gear if they have better stats first. And then you do your alliance raid every week at minimum, so that you can buy, so that you can upgrade to 660 with each piece 1 week at a time. Or you can participate in hunt trains and eventually reach a point where you have too many nuts to work with. Yeah, that is ultimately the path. And if you start savage raiding, that of course adds some stuff. And there are of course some other like side paths, such as buying a relic weapon or collecting a relic weapon like this one. But I would recommend going for that once you have upgraded your crafted gear. I do remember in the final patch of Shadowbringers, like really late, they suddenly upgraded or expanded the weekly tomestones to be 900 per week instead of 450. But you didn't have that much time with it, so it didn't give that much. It mostly just served to be like, oh, if you just reached level 90 now, you still have a chance to collect a full set of tombstone gear. Like, you can still do that. That was mostly what it did. Right. So next, and also, by the way, the upgrading of crafted gear thing with the rain was also something that was added today. Next, There's shocking everyone new furniture. I'm choosing to not go over it because some of it might be mildly spoilery furniture. I'm not going to build on that because, as we've talked about a little bit with my what qualifies as a spoiler video, pointing at something and saying that's a spoiler is the same as a spoiler, because if you didn't say anything, then no one would have noticed. So I'm saying there might be spoilers in the furniture, so I'm choosing to not look at it or show it off. And then you'll never know whether there's spoilers in it or not. You'll know if you know. There are 4 new levels to the Island Sanctuary, which actually includes 3 new restraints, which I assume means that not only do we have new creatures to add to our pasture, but they require new restraints. There's nothing new specifically for your garrisons, so they still have the same 6 targets. There's a bunch of new plants for your cropland, so I wonder if we're going to reach a point where we don't actually have space for everything, so we have to choose to specialize. And yeah, if you participate in the so-called XP explosion, remember to let your workshop mammoth out. It's okay, you can talk with them now. You will probably get a full level if you set it up correctly, just like that. But the max level is 20, so if you were level 16 before the patch, you have 4 new levels. Then we have a small quality of life on Wondrous Tales. If you've done, I don't think I have one on me, I think it's outdated, yep. If you have a Wondrous Tales on you that is not handed in yet, you can actually, you used to be able to talk with Chloe and just get a new one if she had a new one for you. And she would just override your current one. Why this was inconvenient was if you had one on you that you wanted to hand in, but you accidentally clicked the wrong thing and asked for a new book instead, she would just like take your current book, throw it in the trash, and give you a new one. Meaning you just lost out on potential free stuff. According to the patch notes, she will no longer give you a new book as long as you have one. Even though she has one for you, she will not give you a new one until you give her your old one back. So this is no longer an issue. Very small quality of life change. Let me see my notes. The Alliance Raid Roulette change was also added in this patch. So what does that mean? So before the patch, the way that the Alliance raids worked was that you got the daily reward, and then, as is known, Alliance raids old Alliance raids gave 100 poetics. So that's it, you just get 100 poetics and this. You also get a scaling experience bonus, and this experience bonus actually scaled with the length, somewhat with the length and difficulty of the Alliance raid itself. So the level 80 Alliance raids gave more XP than the level 50, 60, and 70 ones. But if you're level 90, that is completely irrelevant. So that led to a lot of people specifically just stripping down to their boxers, if that was what it took, to make sure that the only Alliance raids they could land in was like these 2. Maybe these 3, because those are the fastest and easiest, meaning that you could get this daily reward as quickly as possible. Now, 2 things have been done to alleviate this. The first thing is that there is now a minimum item level requirement that scales with your level. And this means that if you're level 60, the item level requirement to queue for Alliance Raid Roulette is actually the minimum item level requirement for the first Heavensward Alliance Raid. And if you're level 90, the minimum item level requirement will be the minimum item level requirement for the first Endwalker alliance raid. So you're going to get forced to not strip. I know, shock and horror. But the second thing that was added is that all of these alliance raids, all alliance raids pretty much, except the Crystal Tower series from A Realm Reborn, has gotten like massive buffs to their repeated reward. Like, this isn't like insanely massive, but let me just say that if I'm queuing for Alliance Raid Roulette, getting like an extra 80, 60 or 80 causality sounds very nice. As opposed to just getting the 100 poetics. So this actually has made the newer alliance raids less of an issue, you could say. There's an entirely different problem that is still in alliance raids, and the particular problem, and I think I've talked about this before, or I will in the future, is that part of the problem with alliance raid roulette is that you're not sure how long it's going to take. If you queue for a level 90 dungeon, you know it's going to take like, you know, around 15 minutes, maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more. Around 15 minutes, that's pretty reasonable, right? You do a leveling roulette, in most cases, it's going to be, you know, around 15 minutes, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less, maybe a lot less, depending on what you get. Maybe you get Ifrit normal. You queue for trial or normal raid, it's going to be around, you know, 10 to 15 minutes, maybe less. You queue for an alliance raid, it can take 10 minutes if you get Circus Tower and everyone knows what they're doing, or it can take 45 minutes or more if you get Tower Paradigm's Breach and no one knows what they're doing. That's, you know, there's a 35-minute margin there. It's a little hard to calculate with. Gazel says, I will assume it takes 40 minutes when I queue it from now on. That's very, that is a way to go about it, but you can see that if someone is just, you know, just going through the roulettes and they have to choose, like maybe they have to choose between Alliance Raid or something else, Alliance Raid has a bigger range of completion time, at least in my opinion, than main scenario. Which makes it very difficult to know whether you have time for one. It could be worse, you know. It could be Mentor Roulette. Where you could get pretty much anything, right? But yeah, that's just something that I wanted to highlight, is that there is still a possibility that people will not like this. There's also another thing, is that I can't see it. I don't know for sure, given that I have everything unlocked. But because Alliance raids don't actually require you to unlock the raids, if players determine that this reward, just the daily reward itself, is better than getting also this, so the 60 causality and 8 comedy isn't worth the effort, they'd rather have Circus Tower, then that'll lead us to a situation where players will be incentivized, and now relax, excessively optimizing players will be incentivized to go, oh, I should never unlock Void Ark, because if I do that, then I can land in it in alliance raids, and I don't want that. Which is of course hilarious to think about, but some players will do that, and that doesn't help in this problem. Which is of course the reason why they both said you cannot do the down gearing trick anymore. Also, you get a bigger reward for doing it. You know, both forcing you to do it and also rewarding you for doing it, so that you don't feel as compelled to cut out these middle alliance raids. And that is very true, Gazel. Part of the reason why the alliance raids from Heavensward to Shadowbringers take so long is partly because people wipe or die to silly things because they have no idea how to do these alliance raids, because they haven't done them, because they're avoiding them. And they're also causing players that are not trying to avoid them by virtue of, you know, it just takes one person to get 23 other people to get forced down into a crystal tower. Whether that person is a down gearing person, it won't be anymore, or a sprout, it'll still be sprouts. Right. And while we are on the subject of sprouts, the duty support has been expanded to include the remaining MSQ dungeons in the game, which is of course Drowned City of Scala, The Burn, and Gimlet Dark. So now you would be able to do pretty much all dungeons from level specifically MSQ dungeons from level 1 to 90. Without ever having to do them with another player. Now, the problem there is, of course, that there are still trials and alliance raids that you have to do with other players, so it's not completely solo play, right? But you can do all the dungeons. Why it is important to highlight these Stormblood dungeons is that all 3 dungeons have had adjustments made to them. Notably, some bosses have had some changes. We had a little bit of a talk about it recently, what we think has been changed. I have a suspicion that there's a lot more changes in Drowned City of Scala than the other 2 dungeons. And I think the final thing I have, let me just make sure. Oh, right. By the way, there's a new custom delivery for the crafters and gatherers that want to have that. The Thornton is the new Unreal. The normal raid series for the current raid tier is no longer weekly. No longer has a weekly lockout, except these unsung blades of Anabasias, they are still on the weekly lockout. So that means that if you want to stay on top of these, you can buy all of your credendum weapons. I don't even know if I have one. This is one from the previous raids here. You have to do those. You have to do P12 normal every week. You also only need 4 blades to buy them instead of 7. So that does mean that if you didn't buy any credendum weapons and you did P12 every week, then from this week you would be able to buy 5 of them. Just outright, just 1 for each role as you please. Right, PvP stuff. That is the last subject on the list. So there is a new Crystalline Conflict season. If you do seasons, I do believe it's a new season, right? No, wait, the new season comes late October. There's a new series. And the particular highlights of it is the new emote that you might have seen in the patch notes, Schlump, is from here. There are 2 new Framer kits. There's a new minion. Looks like an emerald weapon. There's a new armor set. I think they showed that in the patch notes. And you may have seen, potentially, that there's new stuff to get for trophy crystals. There are these, what are they called? Model ABC outfits. That look like, almost like race car driver outfits. I didn't look at them very long. I was a little bit on a timer. But they're there. There's something to buy with your trophy crystals aside from wolf collars. The key thing with the tome weapons is that even if they have, so that when I say the tome weapons, of course, mean the weapons that you need both comedy tomestones and blades for, is that they do one more damage than the relic weapons. And for some jobs, if not most jobs, that is actually better than the extra stats on the relic weapon, because weapon damage is crazy. I know specifically that Paladin prefers that, despite there being skill speed on it. Like straight up, Paladins do more damage if they're using the skill speed 650 sword, because some of the stats of their weapon is on their shield, so they can just use the relic shield to get mostly fine stats. And then there's the sword that just like is like, meh, I do more damage. I don't use that though. Like, it's a pretty small damage difference as far as I know, so if you don't like the skill speed, you might be fine not doing that. But yeah, there's also the part that, if I remember correctly, they add the ability to buy the upgrade item for the Credendum weapons in a later patch, so that you can buy them with these coins over here, or with sacks of nuts. I think it's both. But by that point, it's very likely that the relic weapons go up to 665, so no win there. Matthew also mentioned that there's a 655 weapon from the new Extreme, and that is also true. If you don't already have 660 weapons, the new Extreme would be able to get you 655 weapons, meaning that those Credendum weapons might be completely pointless right now. And there's also the part that buying the Credendum weapons, of course, means you're spending your comedy on a job-specific weapon, where you could have spent it on armor for multiple jobs or roles. Do I have anything that I have forgotten? Right. One more thing for PvPers. There is some visual aspects that you can set. I believe they made it so that they highlight who's in the lead a lot more, and they have like a bar that like slowly drips out for the overtime, instead of it just being like almost like a feeling when someone isn't on the point. And they said that there was a setting to make it so that the map always shows your team on a specific side, so you don't mess that up. But I didn't check where it was, so I don't really know. But I think that is everything. At least of what I had, that I can go over without spoiling things. But yeah, overall, I think the buffs were nice. I'm sad that there wasn't more changes, because I love patch notes. I love reading job changes on patch notes. Like, I'm still somewhat excited when I see a change that I don't want to a job, because that still means that there's something new to learn. So I'm mildly disappointed that we didn't have more changes, but I do understand why we don't have more changes. Something that might be very interesting to keep in mind is, I saw it a little like at a glance quite quickly, but I do believe that it was stated that in 7.0 a lot of job rotations are going to be very different. It wasn't specified, like saying, oh yeah, by the way, good luck warriors or something like that. It was just many jobs will have very different rotations. That is very vague, so I just wanted to talk about this very briefly before we finish here. Paladin, originally, when they got to level 90 before the full rework thing and everything, the only thing that actually was changed about how they play back in like 6.0 from before Shadowbringers to Endwalker was that you replaced a Goring Blade combo with the 3 Blades combo. Like, technically that can be a major rotation change, because ultimately this led to a lot of adjustments to the actual rotation, to the actual stat preferences of Paladin. We reached like a breaking point where the Paladin moved over to having so much magic damage in their rotation that, and spells, that skill speed started to like have trouble staying relevant. So it had a massive impact on how the job actually plays and how people ended up playing it. Hey Orion. Yeah, exactly, Matthew. That is kind of what I was alluding to, is that it's not unlikely that like a lot of jobs are going to get some changes to the rotation. Is that, oh, you're getting one new GCD, or you're getting one new OGCD, or something like that, and they're anticipating that there's going to be like that it's going to have a significant impact on how the jobs are played. You know, Varric, what I think would be really nice for Paladin was, I don't know, maybe if you could, like, the thing is, on one hand, that might be a little too much. On the other hand, maybe it's good. I feel like it would be better if Atonement and Divine Might was put on a gauge of some sort. I think it would also be nice if you could have more than 3 Atonements stocked at a time. Because if you could do that, then that would automatically solve the issue that you're talking about, I think. Because then you could just do 1, 2, 3, like let's say you could stockpile just randomly 5 Atonements at most. I have no reasoning for why it would be 5, but let's say 5, then you could do 1, 2, 3, Holy Spirit, Atonement, 1, 2, 3, and then you were full. But that still means that you now have 5 Atonements in the chamber to like adjust your rotation. Like you can actually go over and spend as you need. And you might not have to spend all of your Atonements to make space for an additional Royal Authority, so you can set up the 1, 2, Holy Spirit, Royal Authority, Holy Spirit. You might need a bigger gauge than that, but like I'm just saying that Paladin could use a gauge. Hey Zach, good morning. You have a free company house now. Congratulations. But yeah, I just wanted to like dampen some concerns by saying, being told that there's going to be potentially large or big or significant rotation changes to jobs could mean anything. It could mean they're adding a new GCD. It could mean that there's like some other rotational aspect. Like, on the one hand, you could argue that every expansion comes with significant job changes to the rotation. And the only thing that makes it concerning is I'm pretty sure Yoshi P doesn't normally say that. Like, I don't think he would like say it in the same way up to Endwalker. I don't think he said that. But if he said that on Dawn Trail and never said it on a previous expansion that, oh, by the way, there's going to be a lot of major job changes on the next expansion, then it's a lot more concerning, right? Black Lion says, I'm still confused why they removed the dot on Paladin and made it like that. Like, in my opinion, it would be more intuitive if it was an OGC the way it is now. Well, the way it is now, I'm very sorry to say, is this is Scoring Blade. Sorry. This is Scoring Blade. And this and this is Confetti on the 3 blades. The reason why Goring Blade is a GCD is because it's basically Sonic Break, right? I don't know why they removed the dot, but I do believe that their argument was that part of Paladin's weakness as opposed to other tanks, was that they had a heavy focus on dots. I guess they decided Goring Blade had to be pure damage instead of a dot, because if it was a dot in the same way as it was before, it would be too similar to Sonic Break, which is hilarious because it means that the job that had the dot first had to not have it so that the new job could keep it without it being weird. Ymir says, can you glamour out of sight of Sanctuary now? You have always been able to glamour outside of Sanctuaries, but I don't know if you can use a glamour plate outside of a Sanctuary. We can test that. I don't think I saw something about that. So, how do you know you're in a Sanctuary? There's a moon next to your XP bar. Now we are not in a Sanctuary. Unable to apply glamour plates here. Nope. Still not. But you can cast glamours anywhere. Just not glamour plates. Right? Right. I think that's everything. Is there anyone that has any... If there's anyone that have any questions about any of the patch notes before I finish, now's your chance. Ymir says I can use plates on the 13th. Is there a moon next to XP bar on the 13th? That is strange. It might be because it's like an MSQ area. Right. Well, it doesn't sound like there's any major questions. If you were wondering about anything that might be considered a spoiler, or major spoiler or something, preferably not about stuff that has already happened in the 6.5 story, because I haven't done it yet, but anything in the patch notes that you saw and thought, what does this mean? But I didn't go over it here, I was too vague about it because of spoiler concerns. You're very welcome to ask those questions on the stream a little later. What's going to happen now is we're going to round up this stream. I'm going to end the stream then, and then I will take a short break, and then we will do an MSQ stream where, shocker, I will be doing the MSQ for patch 6.5. So if you don't want to be spoiled on this story, I will be doing it on that stream. So take that into consideration. The specific reason why we're not doing it in one stream is specifically so that those that just want the spoiler-free patch discussion can have that, and those that also want to see the MSQ can safely do both. And it also means that if anyone kept the stream going in the background, they don't suddenly find themselves caught in a spoiler stream that they didn't know what was going to happen. So, a few reasons why we're doing it in multiple stream sections. Right, so, if you did enjoy the stream, I would very much appreciate if you left a like on the stream and the YouTube stuff. It helps me, because it tells YouTube that it was actually a good stream. Yeah, and then, beyond that, I hope to see you in a little bit when we start on the MSQ. Right. Thank you so much for watching, and good afternoon. Or evening, night, or morning, depending on where you are. I see somewhere here at 3 in the morning. So, see you very soon. Bye-bye.